Guy, thank you so very much for those warm and loving words, and thank all of you. It's good to be home. Back in 1942, before most of you were even born, our nation was involved in a very mortal struggle called World War II. I enlisted at the tender age of 19, and after about a year and a quarter of very tough training, I received my Silver Bombardier wings and my lieutenant's commission in the Army Air Force. I was actually an officer and a gentleman 10 days before I could vote. Soon afterwards, I was assigned to a B-24 Liberator crew. And after several months of very tough and intensive training in the deserts of the Southwest, we finally one day flew our plane across the country and then across the North Atlantic. And we landed in a tiny little town with an airport just northeast of London. From that base, near the village of Tibenham, I flew 30 combat missions over Germany. My bomb group happened to be the 445th Heavy Bombardment Group, which was also Jimmy Stewart's group. I flew with Jimmy. And the majority of the missions that we flew, thank God, were a success. Plus, I survived. Now, more than 50 years have passed since those scary days. So I've had a lot of time to think about all those frightening missions over enemy territory. And long ago, I became convinced that the prime reason that we reached so many targets so often was because we had been briefed so thoroughly before each mission. Hours before dawn, usually around 3 o'clock in the morning, gentleman would come into our Nissen hut. It slept 12 people. He'd have a clipboard and a flashlight, and he'd walk along in the dark, and he knew where everybody slept by the clipboard. And he'd just lean over and take his shoulder and shake it and say, "Lieutenant, briefing is in 45 minutes. And then he went on to the next, and he wasn't coming back. You better get up. So what we would do is dress, go to the mess hall and gulp some food, and then go on into the large briefing room, and everybody who was flying a combat mission that morning would sit down with their clipboards and take notes and gather all the information we could about the mission and our target for the day. Very brilliant people did this briefing. Give you an example, and I didn't realize this until I was living the life there. One morning, I was drawing coffee out of the big urn in the mess hall when I had a book in my back pocket of my heavy jacket, and I felt the book leaving. And I turned around angrily, but then saw it was the Major of Intelligence, Major or Lieutenant Colonel, I forget what he was, Donald Clapper. He was holding the book in his hand, and he said, "You read many of these, Lieutenant?" It was a Random House Modern Library book. You're familiar with that whole set of modern library books containing all the classics? I said, "Yes, sir. I'm trying to read my way through the whole set of them." I said, "I hope someday to be a writer," and I figured there's no better way than to get some real background by reading the classics. And he said, "Well," as he handed the book to me, "well, you have great taste in books, Lieutenant." He said, "I published those." Well, when I got to my seat with my coffee and my tray, I sat down and I flipped open the book. I said, "Sure, he does." flipped it open, and there on the inside page it said, "Published by Random House, Modern Library, Bennett Cerf, Donald Klopfer, Robert Krause. He really owned Random House with Bennett Cerf. And he had said to me, as he turned and walked away, maybe someday I'll publish one of your books. And I didn't think about this until a couple of months ago, but The 12th Angel, the last book, is published by Fawcett. Fawcett is owned by Random House. Of course, Mr. Klopfer is not around anymore. Too bad. I would have enjoyed sending him a little note. So very brilliant people did the briefing. And actually, briefing is the wrong word to describe all the instruction that we received in the morning. In specific detail, we were told the route to follow to get to the target, what to do, what to avoid. We also were instructed as to what the weather was going to be when we took off, what the weather was going to be along the way, what the weather would be at the target, how much cloud cover we had at the target, the wind velocity at the target, and what kind of opposition we could expect from the ground, the anti-aircraft on the ground, and from fighter planes coming out of the clouds at us. In short, by the time we lifted off in the dark of the morning, we had been thoroughly prepared to reach our goal. And I'm really certain that that explained how come most of us survived. Well, in a way, all of us are on a mission right now, aren't we? A lifetime mission, where our target is success, financial security, happiness, peace of mind, love, self-esteem. And those goals, they're pretty much the same for all of us, no matter what our age may be, no matter what our current status may be. Am I correct? We all have the same goals. Unfortunately, and unlike the combat crews, no one ever briefed us on this long mission called life. No one ever told us what to do, what to expect, how to act, how to deal with the best way to get to the target, and what to avoid. May I be your briefing officer? After more than a quarter of a century of talking about success and writing about success, will you let me try to give you some specifics tonight on what to do and what not to do in order to reach your goals? Will you let me brief you on what you need to do starting right now, starting tomorrow morning if you want, to get to your target, no matter how off course you think you might have wandered in your life? First of all, you are not lost. You are not even off course very much. No matter how far you think you are from your destination, no matter how long you've been traveling on what you think is your wrong course, if you put my briefing instructions into action, you're going to be back on course before you know it. Trust me. Okay. The first thing you need to do as you alter your heading towards success is to resolve that you will never again allow anyone to push your kill switch. You didn't even know you had a kill switch, did you? Let me explain. Years ago, I bought a very expensive automobile that was loaded, had everything you could possibly imagine, including a very elaborate burglar alarm. The salesman also told me I had one other gimmick. Not only had a burglar alarm, but they had installed a kill switch. And knowing he was talking to a dummy when it comes to mechanics, he very carefully and slowly explained to me what the kill switch was. It was a little button under the carpet on the driver's side. And what you would do is that when you get out of your car after you parked it, you turn on the burglar alarm. And that alone, if anybody broke into the car, they would start screaming and making all kinds of noise. But then before you get out of the car, after you turned on the burglar alarm, you reached over and pushed the little button under the carpet called the kill switch. Now what the kill switch did was cut off all the juice from the battery to the motor. So that even if somebody broke into the car and the burglar alarm erupted and started to scream, if this person was foolish enough to stay in the car, and he could, usually, if there was no kill switch, he could drive it off. But if he tried to start the car and jump the wires with the kill switch turned on, nothing would happen. No power would go to the motor. Well, one morning, I never used the kill switch. I had the car, I don't know how long, a year or so. And one morning, I went out, I had an errand to run, and I was in a hurry, and I turned the key, and nothing happened. It cranked over and stuff, but nothing happened. I couldn't get it to start. So I finally went in and I called my salesman at the dealers, and I told him what happened. He said, Og, did you turn on the kill switch? And I said, what? He says, the kill switch. Don't you remember we installed a kill switch in your car? And he said, it's somewhere in the front underneath the carpet. He said, you probably accidentally just tapped it with your foot and put it on. He said, go look. So I went back and looked. I couldn't find it. He said, sit tight. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He knew the dummy couldn't do it. So he arrived, and he took the whole carpet out of the left front seat under the driver, and over in the upper, right up near the accelerator, there's the little kill switch. And he pushed it, and then he said, turn the key. And I turned the key, and the motor started. So many times in our life, somebody has pushed our kill switch. We go through the actions. We think we're moving, we think we're doing everything right, but we're not getting anywhere. It might have been a parent, it might have been a relative, who knows? Somebody might have said to you, you'll never amount to anything. And you know what you do? You spend the rest of your life trying to make that prophecy come true. Never, never again let anybody push your kill switch. Let me put it another way. Never give anyone permission again to rain on your parade. Just don't let them do it to you. Next, understand the fact that all of us, you, me, everyone, will live with crisis all through our lives. All of us spend every living moment either approaching a crisis, in a crisis, or recovering from a crisis. And nobody is immune. There are three major crises in all our lives. First one is the identity crisis, and that hits us somewhere around age 19. We're trying to find ourselves. We're asking, who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing? What am I going to do with my life? Do I want to live like my parents? Identity. It's the first crisis. The second big crisis in our lives is the crisis of reality. And that usually hits us somewhere around age 35. If I'm hitting a few buttons, I'm sorry. One day, it suddenly occurs to us that we're never going to become president of that company we work for. And we might never be able to afford that gorgeous Mercedes, or that Cadillac, or that Lincoln Town Car we've wanted for so long, or that second home in the country. And we might not even be able to send our kids to the colleges they're talking about. And both you and your spouse are working long hours just to stay ahead of the bill collectors. Life has become dull and boring. Peggy Lee years ago recorded a song about that. Remember, is that all there is? That's the reality crisis song. The third major crisis is the mortality crisis. One morning we awake and we're 50 or 60 or 70, and it hits us that we may not be around here forever. And so we assess our life, as so many do, through our material accumulations. And compared to many of our friends and our business acquaintances, we don't stack up so good. And so we must be failures. We've wasted our lives. And we begin to feel sorry for ourselves. Mortality crisis. More than 200 years ago, our nation became the first in the world to ever incorporate the word happiness into its basic founding documents. And then we quickly forgot that beautiful word. And it's been downhill for many of us ever since. Because, trust me, success without happiness is worthless. On my studio wall is a small frame clipping. It's getting brown now with age, the original, from an old 1948 newspaper. It's called The Story of 8 Rich Men. Back in 1923, a very important meeting was held at the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago. Attending this meeting were 8 of the world's most successful financiers. Those present were the president of the largest independent steel company, the president of the largest utility company, the president of the largest gas company, the president of the New York Stock Exchange, a member of the president's cabinet, the greatest bear on Wall Street, the head of the world's greatest monopoly, and the president of the Bank for International Settlements. Certainly we must admit that here were gathered a group of the world's most successful men. At least they were men who had found the secret of making money. Let's see where those men were 25 years later. The president of the largest independent steel company, Charles Schwab, died a bankrupt and lived on borrowed money for 5 years before his death. The president of the greatest utility company, Samuel Insull, died a fugitive from justice and penniless in a foreign land. The president of the largest gas company, Howard Hobson, became insane. The president of the New York Stock Exchange, Richard Whitney, served time in Sing Sing. The member of the president's cabinet, Albert Fall, was pardoned from prison so he could die at home. The greatest bear on Wall Street, Jesse Livermore, died a suicide. The head of the greatest monopoly, Ivan Kruger, died a suicide. The president of the Bank for International Settlements, Leon Fraser, died a suicide. All of these men learned well the art of making money. But not one of them knew how to live. How should we live? What's the best way to handle crisis so that it never slows your mission toward a better life? A great physician, Sir William Osler, honored by his own Canada as well as the United States and Great Britain and Germany, gave the world his answer way back in 1913 when he addressed a student body at Yale University. Live every day of your life, he told the students, in a day-tight compartment. Years before that speech, Sir William had been on an ocean liner, and he was up on the bridge with the captain visiting one day when there was a horrendously loud siren, and then he could hear crunching sound below deck. And the captain explained to him that below deck after the warning sign, compartments were being slammed shut, many of them, all the way underneath. So that if something happened, and this was just a drill, if something happened, they hit an iceberg or something, water would come into one section of the ship, but it wouldn't harm the rest of the ship, and the ship would stay afloat. Even if the Titanic had hit its iceberg and had these compartments underneath, the Titanic would have continued to sail for many, many years. Now, Osler would remember that shipboard message when he talked to the students. Each of you, he told the kids, is on a much more marvelous trip than any ocean liner. You must learn to control your machinery so that you live within day-tight compartments. And that's the most certain way to ensure that you will arrive at your destination. Touch a button, he said, and here at every level of your life, the iron doors shutting out the past, the dead yesterdays. Touch another button and shut off with a metal curtain the future, the unborn tomorrows, and then you are safe. Safe for today. To shut out the past is not easy. The mistakes and the disappointments and the sins and the sorrows and yesterday's crisis, none of that's easy. But you must bury them all in tomorrow's mist. And Osler warned, you must shut off the future just as tightly, for when you add the load of tomorrow to that of yesterday, even the strongest will stumble and fall. The future is today, he said. There is no tomorrow. Live each day in a day-tight compartment and watch your life begin to change for the better. Okay. So far my briefing has been only to get you back on course in case you've drifted off a little bit. Now, to get you to your target, to reach your goal, you've got to remember just one little word. Give. G-I-V-E. Give. Give all that you are able to give, and then some, during all those hours that you're pursuing your career in your day-tight compartment. The greatest secret of success was given to us 2,000 years ago in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus told us, among many wise things, whomsoever asks you to go with him 1 mile, you go 2. Give. Give. No matter what you're doing for a living, no matter what you're doing, resolve that starting tomorrow, you're going to do more than you're expected to do. Work a little harder. At your desk, behind the counter, doesn't matter where. And if you're making sales calls and you usually quit at 5, stay out there for another hour. Keep on until 6. No matter what you're doing, do a little more than you're getting paid to do. Now, it may not make you very popular with your peers because the name of the game today seems to be to do as little as possible for the check you get. But the heck with them. Don't worry about that. Just do a little more than they're paying you to do. And if you did this for 1 month, and then another, and then another, you tell me your life wouldn't change for the better. What can it cost you? Try it. Give. And when you're off the job, continue to give. Give with no thought of any reward. You won't have to look far to find someone who needs your help. Give. Please, give. This high-class name for this giving without any thought of any reward is, it's called altruism. And it appears that those who give unselfishly to others with no thought of any reward, they seem to suffer less stress, less depression, and they seem to enjoy life a lot more. And we don't quite understand why. Even more amazing, Several bright minds are currently researching longevity, and they have come to believe that while we are in the process of helping others unselfishly, our body seems to release that pain-relieving chemical called endorphins, which runners identify as the element that produces a runner's high. Something happens chemically to your body, we don't quite understand what it is. But give. Many years ago, Oscar Wilde wrote a fable touching on this very special kind of giving, this very special kind of love, this love that has no price tag. High above a city on a marble column stood the statue of the Happy Prince. The prince's entire body was covered with little gold leaves. And he had 2 sapphires for his eyes and a huge red ruby on the hilt of his sword. And the townspeople were so proud of their prince, they would walk by in the day and wave up at him and shout to him and sing to him. They loved their happy prince. And one day, a little sparrow who had delayed his trip south a little bit too long because winter was very close, stopped at the feet of the prince to rest. And he closed his eyes and tried to sleep. But the little bird was unable to sleep because the prince was sobbing. And every time the little bird would doze off, the sobbing would wake him. So finally he flew up and landed on the prince's shoulder and said, "Why are you crying? You're the happy prince. You're supposed to be up here enjoying life and happy. Why are you crying?" And the prince said, "Little bird, they put me up here so high above the city, but from up here I can see all the pain, all the suffering, all the hunger, all the terrible things that happen in my city. How can I be a happy prince up here?" And then he said, "Little bird, will you help me give myself away?" And the little bird said, "Yes, I will." The little bird then removed one of the prince's sapphire eyes and flew it down into the city and left it in a cold room with a young mother and 3 children, and they had no food. And the sparrow flew out the window and went up to the little prince again, removed the other sapphire eye, and carried it down into the city and left it at the feet of an old veteran who had no place to live. And then he went back up to the prince, removed the ruby for the prince's sword, brought it down into the city and left it at the feet of a little match girl. And then one by one he removed all the gold leaves from the prince's body and took them down into the city and left them with the poor, with the indigent, with the hurting. And then the cold blasts of winter came. And of course by then the prince had no coat to protect him from the cold, and his little leaden heart cracked. And the little sparrow was unable to protect himself either from the cold, and so the little bird died. And one day God looked down at this special town and said to his angels, "Go down there and bring me back the 2 most precious things in the city." And when the angels returned, they were carrying the broken leaden heart of the prince and the body of a little dead bird. Give. Give. Please, give. Give and grow.